November 24th, 1944. 32,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, approaching the Japanese coastline. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai banks his Mitsubishi A6M0 through the thin, crystalline air, his engine straining against the altitude that pushes both machine and pilot to their absolute limits. Below him, the curvature of the earth stretches endlessly, while above, the sky fades to an almost purple darkness. He has climbed for nearly an hour to reach this height, his Zero's engine coughing in the oxygen-starved atmosphere. Then he sees them. Massive silver shapes moving through the sky like floating fortresses, their four engines churning steadily through air too thin for most aircraft to survive. The bombers are enormous, larger than anything Sakai has ever encountered. Each one dwarfs his nimble Zero, their wingspans stretching wider than a city block. They move with the confidence of giants, untouchable at their impossible altitude. Sakai pushes his throttle forward, but his Zero responds sluggishly. The American bombers cruise effortlessly at heights where his fighter can barely maintain level flight. He watches helplessly as the formation passes overhead, their bomb bay doors opening like the bellies of mechanical whales. The lieutenant cannot know that he is witnessing the first B-29 superfortress raid over Tokyo since the Doolittle raiders 2.5 years earlier. In the cockpits of those silver giants, American airmen peer down at the Japanese capital through crystal-clear air, confident in their technological superiority. The B-29's seem invincible, flying in a realm where Japanese fighters dare not venture. But appearances, as both sides would soon discover, could be devastatingly deceptive. Summer 1944. The Marianas Islands, Pacific Ocean. The thunder of construction echoes across the coral atolls of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam as American Seabees work around the clock to build the longest runways in the Pacific. These are not ordinary airstrips. Each runway stretches over 8,500 feet of reinforced concrete, designed to handle aircraft that push the very boundaries of aviation technology. The islands themselves have been transformed from Japanese strongholds into massive aircraft carriers anchored in the Pacific, their strategic position placing them exactly 1,500 miles from Tokyo. On October 12, 1944, the first Boeing B-29 Superfortress touches down on Saipan's Isley Field, its massive frame dwarfing every other aircraft on the base. The Superfortress represents the culmination of America's most expensive weapons program of World War II, costlier even than the Manhattan Project. Each bomber costs $639,000, equivalent to building a small destroyer, and embodies technologies that seem pulled from science fiction. The B-29 stretches 99 feet from nose to tail, with a wingspan of 141 feet. Its four Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engines generate 2,200 horsepower each, propelling the 133,500-pound giant to speeds of 350 miles per hour at altitudes exceeding 31,000 feet. Most remarkably, the aircraft features pressurized crew compartments, allowing its 11-man crew to operate in comfort while flying at heights that would kill unprotected humans within minutes. The bomber's defensive armament is equally revolutionary. 12 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon are distributed across 4 remote-controlled turrets, all linked to a computerized fire control system that can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. The technology is so advanced that most Japanese pilots have never encountered anything like it. But it is the B-29's range that truly changes the strategic equation in the Pacific. With a combat radius of 1,600 miles while carrying 20,000 pounds of bombs, the Superfortress can strike targets deep within the Japanese home islands and return safely to base. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, Japan's industrial heartland lies within regular reach of American bombers. The Japanese High Command recognizes the threat immediately. Intelligence reports describe the B-29 as a flying battleship, and warn that its operational ceiling places it beyond the reach of most Japanese interceptors. The Nakajima Ki-84. Frank, Japan's most capable high-altitude fighter, can barely reach 32,000 feet under ideal conditions, and only then with severely degraded performance. General Hideki Tojo, Japan's wartime prime minister, issues desperate orders for the development of specialized high-altitude interceptors. The Mitsubishi Ki-83 and Kawasaki Ki-102 programs receive maximum priority, but these aircraft remain months away from operational status. Meanwhile, Japan's existing fighter force, composed primarily of aging Zeros and newer but underpowered Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, struggles to intercept bombers flying at 25,000 feet, let alone the stratospheric altitudes favored by the B-29. On November 1, 1944, a lone B-29 named Tokyo Rose conducts the first photographic reconnaissance mission over the Japanese capital. Flying at 32,000 feet, the aircraft passes over the heart of the city unchallenged, its cameras recording detailed images of potential targets. Japanese fighters scramble desperately to intercept, but the highest climbing Zero reaches only 28,000 feet before its engine fails from oxygen starvation. The reconnaissance photos reveal a sobering truth about Japan's vulnerability. Tokyo sprawls across hundreds of square miles, its industrial districts interwoven with dense residential neighborhoods constructed almost entirely of wood and paper. The city's firefighting capabilities, designed for peacetime emergencies, appear woefully inadequate for wartime conditions. American intelligence analysts note with clinical precision that Tokyo represents an ideal target for incendiary attack. 3 weeks later, on November 24, 1944, Brigadier Generals Al-Emmett Rosie O'Donnell leads 111 B-29's from Saipan on the first strategic bombing mission against Tokyo since the Doolittle raid. The formation flies at 27,000 to 33,000 feet, confident in their altitude advantage. Japanese fighters swarm upward to meet them, but most cannot reach the bomber's operating altitude. Those few that do arrive find themselves struggling to maintain formation in the thin air, their controls sluggish and their engines gasping for oxygen. The raid produces minimal damage. Fewer than 25 bombers reach the primary target due to fierce headwinds and mechanical failures. But the psychological impact proves immense. For Japanese pilots watching helplessly from below, the sight of American bombers cruising unmolested through the skies above their capital represents a fundamental shift in the war's trajectory. In the weeks that follow, more B-29 raids target Japanese cities with increasing frequency. Each mission reinforces the same bitter lesson. Japan's air defenses, once formidable enough to dominate the Pacific skies, now appear obsolete against American technological superiority. December 1944, February 1945. Japanese air bases across the home islands. The reality of Japan's deteriorating air defense becomes starkly apparent in the frigid hangars scattered across Honshu and Kyushu. Where once stood rows of immaculate Zeros piloted by veteran aces with hundreds of combat hours, now sit patched aircraft flown by teenagers with barely 50 hours of flight training. The attrition of 3 years of Pacific warfare has gutted Japan's pilot corps, leaving behind a hollow shell of its former strength. Flight Sergeant Yasuo Kuwahara, 19 years old and fresh from abbreviated flight school, stares up at the belly of a B-29 passing 30,000 feet overhead. His Nakajima Ki-84. Frank, theoretically Japan's most advanced interceptor, sits grounded with chronic engine problems, even when operationals. The aircraft's service ceiling of 34,000 feet means reaching the American bombers requires a desperate climb that leaves little fuel for combat maneuvering. Kuwahara and his squadron mates have attempted interception 17 times. They have engaged the enemy exactly twice. The numbers tell a devastating story. In 1942, the average Japanese pilot possessed over 700 hours of flight training before entering combat. By late 1944, new pilots receive less than 100 hours, with many reporting for combat duty after only 40 hours in the cockpit. Fuel shortages compound the crisis. Training flights are limited to essential maneuvers only, leaving pilots unprepared for the complex high-altitude combat required to engage B-29 formations. Japan's aircraft production, despite heroic efforts by workers and engineers, cannot match the quality or quantity emerging from American factories. The Mitsubishi A6M0, once the terror of the Pacific, now appears as obsolete as a bamboo spear against modern armor. Its lightweight construction, optimized for range and maneuverability at low altitudes, becomes a fatal liability in the thin air above 25,000 feet. Zeros attempting to intercept B-29's frequently experience structural failures as their airframes, stressed beyond design limits, simply break apart. Even Japan's newest fighters struggle against the American giants. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony and Ki-100, excellent aircraft at medium altitudes, lose significant performance above 25,000 feet. Their engines, designed for sea-level power, gasp ineffectively in the rarefied atmosphere where B-29's cruise effortlessly. Pilots report frustrating encounters where they climb desperately for 20 minutes, only to watch helplessly as the bombers maintain formation speeds their interceptors cannot match at altitude. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles south in the Marianas, American aircrews face their own frustrations despite their technological advantages. The high-altitude precision bombing doctrine, successful against German industrial targets, proves inadequate against Japanese cities. Mission after mission returns with reconnaissance photos showing minimal damage to primary targets. The jet stream, a meteorological phenomenon unknown to American planners, creates wind speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour at bombing altitudes, scattering ordnance far from intended targets. Major General Curtis LeMay, the hard-driving commander of A-1 Bomber Command, paces the operations tent at Guam's North Field, studying damage assessment photographs with growing frustration. His B-29's represent the most sophisticated weapons system in human history. Yet Japanese industrial production continues virtually unimpeded. The Nakajima aircraft plant at Musashino, target of repeated high-altitude attacks, shows only minor damage after dozens of missions. LeMay's anger stems not just from tactical failure, but from strategic urgency. Intelligence estimates suggest that Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, could cost 1 million American casualties. The B-29 campaign represents the alternative, forcing Japanese surrender through strategic bombing alone. But current results suggest this alternative may be failing. The General's staff presents sobering statistics. Despite flying 1,200 sorties against Japanese targets, the B-29 force has destroyed less than 10% of its assigned objectives. Worse, the high-altitude tactics expose the bombers to maximum danger from the jet stream while minimizing their effectiveness against targets. Several aircraft have crashed into the Pacific after fuel exhaustion caused by fighting fierce headwinds at altitude. On February 19, 1945, everything changes. A small-scale incendiary test raid against Kobe demonstrates the devastating effectiveness of firebombs against Japanese construction. The M69 incendiary, a 6-pound hexagonal cluster containing napalm gel, proves ideally suited to igniting the wood and paper structures that dominate Japanese cities. Post-strike photography shows entire city blocks reduced to ash and char. LeMay studies these photographs with growing excitement. Here, finally, is a weapon system that matches the target: gelid gasoline against cities built like kindling boxes. But exploiting this discovery requires abandoning everything American bomber doctrine holds sacred. High-altitude precision bombing must give way to low-level area attacks. Individual aircraft protection must be sacrificed for maximum bomb loads. Most controversially, Civilian areas must be targeted directly rather than avoided. The transformation of American bombing strategy occurs gradually through February 1945. Small-scale incendiary raids against Nagoya and Tokyo test the concept while gathering intelligence on Japanese defensive responses. Each mission confirms the same pattern. Japanese fighters struggle to intercept even at medium altitudes. Anti-aircraft defenses concentrate around military and industrial areas, and fire spreads rapidly through residential districts. By early March 1945, LeMay has reached his decision. The B-29 force will abandon high-altitude precision tactics in favor of low-level incendiary attacks designed to create uncontrollable firestorms. The strategy represents a complete reversal of American doctrine, trading safety for effectiveness in a calculated gamble that Japan's weakened defenses cannot prevent. As LeMay finalizes plans for Operation Meeting House, Japanese pilots continue their futile attempts to intercept the high-flying raiders. They cannot know that American strategy is about to shift dramatically, bringing those seemingly invulnerable silver giants down to altitudes where desperate courage might, for once, stand a chance against overwhelming technology. The human reality of technological disparity. Flight Lieutenant Minoru Suzuki climbs through 20,000 feet in his Nakajima Ki-84, the engine laboring against air so thin it barely sustains combustion. Above him, a formation of 12 B-29’s maintains steady course toward Tokyo, their contrails scribing perfect white lines against the winter sky. The Americans fly with the casual confidence of gods surveying the earth below, untouchable in their pressurized cockpits, while Suzuki gasps oxygen through a crude rubber mask that freezes against his face. This scene, repeated daily across Japanese airspace, encapsulates the human dimension of technological warfare. For Japanese pilots trained in the Bushido tradition of individual combat prowess, the B-29 represents an enemy that cannot be engaged on equal terms. Victory requires not superior skill or courage, but access to technology that simply does not exist in Japanese arsenals. Suzuki's Ki-84 Frank represents Japan's most advanced production fighter, incorporating lessons learned from 3 years of Pacific combat. Its Homare engine generates 1,900 horsepower, and its armament of 4 20mm cannons can devastate any aircraft within range. But against B-29's operating 10,000 feet above his maximum effective altitude, these advantages become meaningless. The lieutenant might as well be throwing stones at aircraft flying beyond the atmosphere. The psychological impact on Japanese aviators proves devastating. These men, many of them veterans of Pearl Harbor and the early Pacific campaigns, had dominated enemy skies through superior training and equipment. Now they watch helplessly as formations of enemy bombers traverse Japanese airspace like aerial highways, immune to interception. The experience transforms confident warriors into frustrated observers of their homeland's destruction. A technological revolution. Inside the pressurized cabin of B-29 Enola Gay, Technical Sergeant Robert Caron peers through the bomber's transparent nose section at the sprawling metropolis of Tokyo 30,000 feet below. His heated flight suit maintains a comfortable body temperature, while outside temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The aircraft's cabin pressure equals conditions at 8,000 feet elevation, allowing the crew to function normally without oxygen masks or bulky protective equipment. This technological cocoon represents a revolution in aviation warfare. Previous bombers required crews to endure brutal conditions, extreme cold, oxygen deprivation, and exposure to the elements through open gun positions. The B-29's environmental systems allow its 11-man crew to operate effectively during missions lasting 12 hours or more, maintaining peak performance throughout extended combat operations. The bomber's defensive armament reflects similar technological advancement. 4 remotely controlled turrets mount 12 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all linked to a General Electric computerized fire control system. When Japanese fighters approach within range, the system automatically calculates lead angles, target speed, and ballistic corrections, then directs all relevant guns to engage simultaneously. The technology represents the first application of analog computing to aerial combat. But the B-29's most revolutionary capability remains its operational altitude. The aircraft cruises comfortably at 31,000 feet while carrying 20,000 pounds of ordnance across distances exceeding 3,000 miles. This performance envelope places it beyond the effective reach of most Axis interceptors, while enabling deep strikes against previously invulnerable targets. The strategic asymmetry. The technological gap between American and Japanese aviation extends beyond individual aircraft to encompass entire industrial systems. Boeing's Wichita plant produces one B-29 every 4 hours through assembly line techniques pioneered in automobile manufacturing. Each bomber incorporates 55,000 individual components manufactured by subcontractors across the United States, then shipped to Kansas for final assembly. Japan's aircraft industry, by contrast, relies heavily on manual craftsmanship and cottage production methods. Skilled artisans hand-build major components in small workshops, creating aircraft of excellent individual quality but limited quantity. The Mitsubishi Zero requires approximately 17,000 man-hours to complete, compared to 4,000 man-hours for mass-produced American fighters. This disparity compounds as the war progresses. American production increases geometrically, while Japanese output declines due to material shortages and bombing damage. By early 1945, the United States manufactures aircraft at rates Japan cannot match even theoretically, creating an aerial order of battle that favors America by margins approaching 10-1 in some categories. The altitude advantage, the vertical dimension of combat, proves decisive in the B-29's early operations. American bombers routinely operate at altitudes where Japanese fighters experience severe performance degradation. Engine power drops significantly in thin air, reducing climbing ability and maximum speed. Control surfaces become sluggish, making formation flying difficult and accurate gunnery nearly impossible. Japanese test pilots report that intercepting B-29's requires climbing to maximum altitude, then maintaining position while the bomber formation approaches. This tactic consumes enormous quantities of fuel and leaves fighters with minimal reserves for combat maneuvering. Most interception attempts fail when Japanese aircraft run low on fuel before engaging the enemy. The few successful Ansatsu counters demonstrate the challenge facing Japanese pilots. Even when fighters reach bomber altitude, their reduced performance makes sustained attack runs extremely difficult. Inside the pressurized cabin of B-29, Enola Gay, Technical Sergeant Robert Caron peers through the bomber's transparent nose section at the sprawling metropolis of Tokyo 30,000 feet below. His heated flight suit maintains a comfortable body temperature, while outside temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The aircraft's cabin pressure equals conditions at 8,000 feet elevation, allowing the crew to function normally without oxygen masks or bulky protective equipment. This technological cocoon represents a revolution in aviation warfare. Previous bombers required crews to endure brutal conditions, extreme cold, oxygen deprivation, and exposure to the elements through open gun positions. The B-29's environmental systems allow its 11-man crew to operate effectively during missions lasting 12 hours or more, maintaining peak performance throughout extended combat operations. The bomber's defensive armament reflects similar technological advancement. 4 remotely controlled turrets mount 12 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all linked to a General Electric computerized fire control system. When Japanese fighters approach within range, the system automatically calculates lead angles, target speed, and ballistic corrections, then directs all relevant guns to engage simultaneously. The technology represents the first application of analog computing to aerial combat. But the B-29's most revolutionary capability remains its operational altitude. The aircraft cruises comfortably at 31,000 feet, while carrying 20,000 pounds of ordnance across distances exceeding 3,000 miles. This performance envelope places it beyond the effective reach of most Axis interceptors, while enabling deep strikes against previously invulnerable targets. The strategic asymmetry, the technological gap between American and Japanese aviation, extends beyond individual aircrafts, to encompass entire industrial systems. Boeing's Wichita plant produces one B-29 every 4 hours through assembly line techniques pioneered in automobile manufacturing. Each bomber incorporates 55,000 individual components manufactured by subcontractors across the United States, then shipped to Kansas for final assembly. Japan's aircraft industry, by contrast, relies heavily on manual craftsmanship and cottage production methods. Skilled artisans hand-build major components in small workshops, creating aircraft of excellent individual quality but limited quantity. The Mitsubishi Zero requires approximately 17,000 man-hours to complete, compared to 4,000 man-hours for mass-produced American fighters. This disparity compounds as the war progresses. American production increases geometrically, while Japanese output declines due to material shortages and bombing damage. By early 1945, the United States manufactures aircraft at rates Japan cannot match even theoretically, creating an aerial order of battle that favors America by margins approaching 10-1 in some categories. The altitude advantage. The vertical dimension of combat proves decisive in the B-29's early operations. American bombers routinely operate at altitudes where Japanese fighters experience severe performance degradation. Engine power drops significantly in thin air, reducing climbing ability and maximum speed. Control surfaces become sluggish, making formation flying difficult and accurate gunnery nearly impossible. Japanese test pilots report that intercepting B-29's requires climbing to maximum altitude, then maintaining position while the bomber formation approaches. This tactic consumes enormous quantities of fuel and leaves fighters with minimal reserves for combat maneuvering. Most interception attempts fail when Japanese aircraft run low on fuel before engaging the enemy. The few successful E-10 encounters demonstrate the challenge facing Japanese pilots. Even when fighters reach bomber altitude, their reduced performance makes sustained attack runs extremely difficult. Guns that function perfectly at sea level often freeze or malfunction in the extreme cold of high altitude. Pilots wearing bulky oxygen equipment find their reaction times slowed and their accuracy degraded. The B-29's altitude advantage also complicates Japanese anti-aircraft defenses. Most flak guns cannot reach targets above 25,000 feet, and those capable of such performance lack sufficient ammunition for sustained fire. Radar sets, primitive by American standards, struggle to track high-altitude targets with the precision required for effective gunnery direction. These multiple advantages combine to create operational invulnerability for American bomber formations. Japanese defenders can observe the raids, they can attempt interception, but they cannot prevent them. The psychological impact of this helplessness pervades Japanese military thinking and begins eroding confidence in ultimate victory. The architect of destruction, Major General Curtis LeMay, stands before a wall-mounted map of Japan in his headquarters on Guam, red pins marking the locations of 73 major industrial cities. Each pin represents thousands of tons of bombs yet to be dropped, hundreds of thousands of lives hanging in the balance. At 38 years old, LeMay has already earned a reputation as the most ruthless and effective bombing commander in the American arsenal, but the strategic situation in the Pacific tests even his considerable resolve. The mathematics of destruction consume LeMay's thinking. His B-29 force represents an investment of $8 billion and the concentrated effort of 40,000 workers, yet after 4 months of operations, Japanese industrial production continues at nearly pre-war levels. High-altitude precision bombing, the doctrine that devastated German cities, proves ineffective against targets designed by nature to burn rather than shatter. LeMay's essay. TAF presents daily intelligence briefings that reinforce his growing frustration. Reconnaissance photographs show minimal damage to primary targets despite the expenditure of thousands of tons of ordnance. The Kawasaki aircraft plant in Akashi, attacked repeatedly with high-explosive bombs, continues producing fighters at full capacity. The Mitsubishi engine works in Nagoya shows scorch marks but no significant structural damage. But scattered among these failure reports lie hints of a different approach. Small-scale incendiary attacks against secondary targets produce dramatically different results. A February raid against Kobe using M69 cluster bombs creates fires that consume entire city blocks, destroying small-scale industrial facilities that precision bombing barely scratched. Post-strike analysis reveals that these cottage industry targets, small workshops producing aircraft components in residential neighborhoods, represent a significant portion of Japan's military production. The strategic gamble. The decision to abandon high-altitude tactics represents the most audacious strategic gamble of LeMay's career. Every principle of American bombing doctrine argues against low-level night attacks using incendiary weapons. The risks appear enormous: increased vulnerability to anti-aircraft fire, higher chance of fighter interception, greater crew casualties. But the potential rewards, complete destruction of Japan's war-making capacity without invasion, justify accepting unprecedented hazards. LeMay's analysis of Japanese defensive capabilities suggests the gamble might succeed. Intelligence reports indicate that Japanese anti-aircraft defenses concentrate around major military installations, leaving industrial and residential areas relatively unprotected. Night fighter strength has declined dramatically due to fuel shortages and pilot attrition. Most importantly, Japanese firefighting capabilities appear completely inadequate for dealing with large-scale incendiary attacks. The General Staff expresses serious reservations about targeting civilian areas directly. International law, as codified in the Hague Conventions, prohibits deliberate attacks on non-combatant populations. But LeMay argues that Japanese industrial production has become so dispersed throughout residential areas that military and civilian targets are essentially indistinguishable. Destroying Japan's cottage industry requires burning the cottages. The moral calculus, the ethical implications of incendiary bombing weigh heavily on American planners, but strategic necessity appears to override moral concerns. Casualty estimates for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, range from 500,000 to 1 million American dead and wounded. If strategic bombing can force Japanese surrender without invasion, even massive civilian casualties might represent the lesser evil. LeMay himself expresses no public doubts about the morality of targeting Japanese cities. His private correspondence reveals a man convinced that total war requires total commitment to victory, regardless of humanitarian costs. "We're going to bomb them back into the Stone Age," he tells subordinates during planning meetings. "Every means of production, every workshop, every home that might shelter a war worker." This philosophy reflects broader changes in American strategic thinking during World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor and Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners have created a public appetite for retribution that previous wars never generated. Opinion polls show overwhelming American support for bombing Japanese cities, even when informed that civilian casualties will be massive. The technical innovation, the shift to low-level incendiary tactics, requires complete re-engineering of B-29 operations. Aircraft stripped of defensive armament can carry twice the bomb load, but crew survival depends entirely on avoiding enemy contact. Formation flying at night and low altitude demands navigation skills that few bomber crews possess. Most challenging, the new tactics require precision timing to create the firestorms that will maximize destruction. LeMay's operations staff develops innovative solutions to these technical challenges. Pathfinder aircraft equipped with advanced radar will mark target areas with colored incendiary bombs, creating distinctive patterns visible to following formations. Main force bombers will attack in carefully choreographed waves, each adding fuel to fires started by previous aircraft. Weather reconnaissance flights will ensure optimal wind conditions for fire spread. The M69 incendiary bomb itself represents a masterpiece of destructive engineering. Each 6-pound hexagonal cluster contains gelid gasoline that ignites on impact, creating fires that burn at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The napalm gel adheres to any surface it contacts, making the fires virtually impossible to extinguish with conventional methods. Deployed in clusters of 38 bombs per container, a single B-29 can scatter nearly 1,500 individual fires across target areas. The point of no return. By early March 1945, LeMay has reached his final decision. Operation Meeting House will demonstrate whether incendiary bombing can achieve strategic objectives that precision attacks have failed to accomplish. The target, Tokyo's Koto and Fukagawa districts, contains an estimated 750,000 civilians living in structures built almost entirely of wood and paper. Weather forecasts predict strong winds that will fan any fires to maximum intensity. The operational order for Meeting House reflects LeMay's characteristic bluntness. This force will bomb the primary target using demolition and incendiary bombs. Primary target is urban area of Tokyo. No mention of military objectives or precision targeting, just the straightforward intent to burn Japan's capital city to the ground. As LeMay signs the final operations order, he understands that success will transform strategic bombing doctrine permanently. Failure will end his career and potentially prolong the Pacific War by months or years. But the general has calculated the odds with characteristic precision, and those calculations point toward a single conclusion: Tokyo must burn. In less than 72 hours, 334 B-29 superfortresses will lift off from runways across the Marianas, their bomb bays loaded with nearly 2,000 tons of gelid gasoline. The largest incendiary raid in human history is about to transform theoretical strategic concepts into blazing reality across 16 square miles of the world's largest city. March 9, 1945, 5:36 p.m., Northfield, Guam. The first B-29 superfortress of the 314th Bombardment Wing rolls down the coral runway as evening shadows stretch across the Marianas. Straight Flush, piloted by Major Thomas Power, lifts into the tropical air carrying a crew that understands they are about to participate in the largest incendiary raid in human history. Behind Power's aircraft, 333 more B-29s wait in carefully orchestrated sequence, each scheduled for takeoff at precise 50-second intervals. The sight defies imagination. Silver bombers stretch in endless lines across 3 different islands, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, their engines warming in the humid Pacific air. Ground crews make final checks on bomb loads that represent a fundamental departure from everything American bomber doctrine has previously attempted. Each aircraft carries between 6 and 8 tons of M69 incendiary clusters, enough gelid gasoline to incinerate several city blocks. Major Power banks his aircraft northwest toward Japan, beginning a 7-hour flight that will culminate in the most devastating single air attack of World War II. His crew, like hundreds of others now airborne across the Marianas, has been briefed on tactics that seem to violate every principle of bomber operations. They will attack at night, flying at altitudes between 4,900 and 9,200 feet, dangerously low by B-29 standards. Most shockingly, their aircraft have been stripped of most defensive armament to accommodate maximum bomb loads. 10:47 p.m., March 9th. Pathfinder aircraft over Tokyo Bay. Captain James Hopkins pilots straight flush through scattered clouds above Tokyo Bay, his radar operator calling out navigation fixes as the Japanese capital materializes in the darkness ahead. The city sprawls across the Kanto plain like a vast organism, its millions of inhabitants sleeping peacefully in wooden houses that will soon become funeral pyres. Hopkins can see individual street patterns in the moonlight, the geometric precision of urban planning about to be obliterated by carefully orchestrated chaos. The Pathfinder aircraft carry a special payload, clusters of napalm bombs mixed with colored incendiaries designed to mark target areas for the main bomber stream. Hopkins's target coordinates specify an intersection in the heart of Tokyo's Shitamachi district, where narrow streets wind between densely packed wooden structures housing small factories, workshops, and residential areas. Intelligence estimates suggest 103,000 people live within each square mile of the target zone. At exactly midnight, Hopkins opens his bomb bay doors. The first incendiary clusters tumble toward Tokyo, their contents scattering across a roughly rectangular area measuring 3 miles by 4 miles. On impact, the M69 bombs burst into brilliant orange flames that immediately begin consuming the tinder-dry wooden structures below. Within minutes, hundreds of individual fires merge into distinct patterns, a massive fiery X that marks the target area for bombers still crossing the Pacific. 15 a.m., March 10th, Maine. Force approaches. The entire target area now appears as a single sheet of flame extending from horizon to horizon, generating light so intense that Marshall can read documents inside his aircraft without artificial illumination. The fire below has achieved the characteristics of a true firestorm, a phenomenon previously observed only in nature's most violent volcanic eruptions. The B-29 formations continue their methodical destruction, dropping incendiary loads across the target area in carefully planned patterns designed to prevent firefighting efforts and ensure maximum burn coverage. Each aircraft's bomb load covers an area approximately 2,000 feet long by 300 feet wide, with multiple aircraft striking overlapping zones to guarantee complete saturation. The precision of destruction contrasts grotesquely with the chaotic horror unfolding below. Japanese attempts at fighter interception achieve minimal success against the overwhelming bomber formations. A few Zero fighters manage to reach attacking altitude, but their pilots find themselves virtually blind in the smoke and flame-lit darkness. Most fighter attacks fail to press home due to the violent air turbulence created by the firestorm itself. Several Japanese aircraft crash after being caught in downdrafts that slam them into the ground with crushing force. The sound of the firestorm begins to rival that of the bomber engines themselves, a continuous roar created by thousands of individual fires consuming oxygen at rates that create acoustic effects audible miles away. American aircrew report hearing the fires roar over their engine noise, describing it as similar to standing beside a massive waterfall or industrial furnace. As the main bomber formations complete their attack runs and turn southeast toward the Marianas, they leave behind a conflagration that will burn for 3 more days, consuming everything combustible across Akawukot, an urban area larger than Manhattan. A.M., March 10th, Ground Zero, Fukagawa District, Tokyo. 16-year-old Michiko Kitagawa awakens to the sound of her wooden house creaking as if under tremendous pressure. The air in her family's small room has become stifling hot, and through the paper walls she can hear a sound like freight trains roaring past in endless succession. When she slides open the shoji screen to peer outside, a blast of superheated air nearly knocks her backward. The narrow street outside glows orange-red, and she realizes with dawning horror that the entire neighborhood is burning. The firestorm has achieved its own horrifying momentum. Winds created by rising superheated air now exceed hurricane force, feeding oxygen to the flames while simultaneously spreading burning debris across vast areas. The temperature at street level reaches levels that turn human fat into liquid and cause clothing to ignite spontaneously. Michiko's neighbors stream past her house in panic, many already ablaze, their screams lost in the thunderous roar of the advancing fire. Mrs. Sumiko Morikawa, a widow with 3 small children, leads her family toward what she believes is safety, the concrete schoolhouse 6 blocks away. But the streets themselves have become death traps. Molten asphalt, heated to 1,000 degrees by radiant energy from burning buildings, flows like lava between the structures. Those who stumble and fall into the liquid pavement are cooked alive in moments, their bodies fusing with the roadway itself. The firestorm creates its own meteorological system, generating tornado-like vortices that lift burning debris thousands of feet into the air before dropping it miles away to start new fires. Witnesses describe seeing entire wooden buildings lifted intact by the convection currents, spinning like toys before disintegrating in mid-air and raining burning frags, ments across previously untouched neighborhoods. 30 a.m., the Sumida River becomes a killing ground. Tens of thousands of Tokyo residents flee toward the Sumida River, believing that water offers salvation from the surrounding inferno. The massive concrete bridges spanning the river become bottlenecks where desperate crowds create deadly human stampedes. On the Kototoi Bridge, so many people jam together seeking escape that hundreds are crushed to death by the sheer weight of the panicking masses. Those who succeed in reaching the river face a horror beyond imagination. The water temperature has risen to nearly 140 degrees Fahrenheit from radiant heat reflected off the burning city. Families who plunge into the river expecting relief find themselves being slowly boiled alive. The concrete embankments, superheated by the firestorm, cook anyone who touches them with bare skin. Yoshiko Hashimoto, a young mother carrying her infant son, reaches the river's edge only to discover that the wooden docks have ignited and are burning like massive torches. She wades into the water, holding her baby above her head, but the river current carries burning debris that sets her hair and clothing ablaze. Around her, hundreds of other refugees float face down in water that has become too hot to survive. The fires surrounding the river create their own wind system, generating downdrafts that force superheated gases across the water surface. These gas clouds, containing carbon monoxide and other toxic compounds, kill through asphyxiation those who might otherwise survive the heat. Bodies pile up along the riverbanks in grotesque pyramids, some still burning, others cooked to the consistency of charcoal. 12 a.m. Futaba Elementary School. Principal Shigenori Kubota has opened his school as an emergency shelter, believing that the large concrete building will protect refugees from the surrounding fires. Over 4,000 people crowd into the structure, families, elderly residents and children separated from their parents in the chaos. The building's swimming pool attracts hundreds seeking relief from the intense heat, but what they find there becomes one of the night's most horrific scenes. As the firestorm intensifies around the school, the temperature inside the building rises to oven-like levels. The concrete walls and floors become so hot they burn human flesh on contact. Those who packed into the swimming pool, thinking water would save them, discovered that the pool had become a cooking vessel. The water temperature reaches boiling point, literally cooking alive everyone immersed in it. By morning, investigators will find over 3,000 bodies in and around the Futaba school. Most show no signs of burning. They have been baked to death by radiant heat, their internal organs cooked while their skin remains relatively intact. The swimming pool, once filled to capacity with water and refugees, stands empty except for the desiccated remains of over 1,000 victims. 2 a.m. The B-29’s return home. Major Robert Raymer pilots City of Los Angeles southeast toward Guam, his crew silent as they process what they have witnessed and participated in. Behind them, Tokyo burns with such intensity that the glow remains visible on the horizon even after flying 150 miles from the target. The bomber's aluminum skin, heated by thermal radiation from the firestorm, remains too hot to touch hours after departing the target area. Navigation back to base proves simple. The burning city provides a beacon visible across hundreds of miles of Pacific Ocean. Aircrew members later described the sight as simultaneously magnificent and terrible, a man-made aurora that lights up the night sky with colors that have no names. Some crew members weep openly as they realize the scale of civilian suffering they have helped create. The statistics of destruction defy comprehension. In less than 3 hours, 334 B-29 superfortresses have dropped 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs across 16 square miles of Tokyo, creating a firestorm that kills more people in a single night than any other air raid in human history. The death toll will ultimately reach approximately 100,000 people, more than either atomic bomb will claim individually. Radio intercepts from Japanese emergency services paint a picture of complete systemic collapse. Fire departments report that all equipment in the target area has been destroyed or abandoned. Police communications describe complete evacuation impossible and casualty estimates beyond calculation. Military commanders acknowledge that their air defense system has been rendered completely ineffective against low-level night attacks. 1:30 a.m. Dawn reveals the apocalypse. As the sun rises over Tokyo Bay, reconnaissance aircraft photograph a scene of destruction that surpasses even the most pessimistic American predictions. Where 16 square miles of densely populated city had stood the previous evening, nothing remains but smoking ash and twisted metal. The geometric precision of Tokyo's street grid has vanished, replaced by a uniform grey wasteland that extends to every horizon. The fires continue burning, fed by debris and human bodies that serve as fuel for flames that will smoulder for days. Aerial photographs show no signs of organized rescue operations. The infrastructure for emergency response has been completely destroyed along with everything else in the target area. Those few concrete buildings that remain standing are empty shells, their contents incinerated and their occupants reduced to carbon shadows on heat-scarred walls. Japanese officials, when finally able to assess the damage, discover that the night's destruction exceeds the cumulative damage from all previous B-29 raids combined. The cottage industries that produced crucial aircraft components have been obliterated along with the residential areas that housed them. More critically, the psychological impact of the raid has shattered Japanese confidence in their ability to defend the homeland. Emperor Hirohito, surveying damage reports in his underground bunker, privately acknowledges for the first time that Japan cannot win the war. The demonstration of American capability to destroy entire cities in single raids makes continued resistance appear futile. But the Emperor's realization will remain private for 5 more months, during which American bombers will burn dozens more Japanese cities to ash and bone. The transformation is complete. The B-29 superfortress, initially designed for precision bombing at extreme altitude, has become the instrument of urban destruction at close range. Japanese pilots who once mocked the bomber's size now watch helplessly as formation after formation reduce their homeland to smouldering ruins, one city at a time. March 10, 1945, 8:00 a.m. Tokyo, the morning after. Dr. Kubota Shigenori stumbles through streets that no longer exist, searching for landmarks in a landscape transformed beyond recognition. The family physician has lived in Tokyo's Fukagawa district for 37 years, but the neighborhood where he delivered hundreds of babies and treated generations of families has vanished as completely as if it never existed. In its place stretches an ash-covered wasteland punctuated by the skeletal remains of concrete structures and twisted metal that once formed the infrastructure of urban life. The smell overwhelms everything else, a sickening mixture of charred wood, melted metal, and burned human flesh that permeates the air for miles around the devastated area. Dr. Kubota wraps a cloth around his face, but the stench penetrates every barrier, clinging to clothing and hair with a persistence that will haunt survivors for decades. Emergency workers describe the odor as unlike anything in their experience, a smell that defies comparison and triggers immediate nausea in everyone who encounters it. Bodies lie everywhere, but identifying them proves impossible. The intense heat has reduced most victims to charcoal-like remnants that crumble at the slightest touch. Others have been literally baked into the pavement, their forms preserved as dark shadows in the melted asphalt. At street intersections, piles of bodies 2 meters high mark places where fleeing crowds were overtaken by the firestorm, their remains fused together by temperatures that exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The Sumida River, once Tokyo's primary waterway, has become a floating morgue. Thousands of bodies drift downstream, their numbers so vast that they jam against bridges and create human dams that block the river's flow. The water itself remains warm to the touch hours after the bombing, heated by the burning city and by the decomposing organic matter it now carries toward Tokyo Bay. Emergency response collapses. Fire Chief Otani Yoshio surveys the remnants of his department from the steps of a damaged fire station on the edge of the devastated zone. Of his 8,000 firefighters, more than 3,000 are missing and presumed dead. Every piece of equipment stationed within the target area has been destroyed, including 400 fire trucks and all 3 of the city's extension ladders. The few surviving stations lack water pressure because the bombing has severed every major water main feeding the affected districts. The magnitude of destruction overwhelms every emergency system Tokyo possesses. Police Captain Yamamoto Kenji reports that his entire precinct, officers, equipment, records, and the station building itself has been obliterated. Of 200 policemen assigned to the Fukagawa district, only 23 have reported for duty. The rest are dead, missing, or too severely injured to work. Medical facilities face impossible demands with decimated resources. Tokyo General Hospital, located just outside the burned area, receives over 15,000 casualties in the first 12 hours after the raid. Dr. Hashimoto Takeshi, the hospital's chief surgeon, works continuously for 36 hours treating burns, smoke inhalation, and traumatic injuries. But medical supplies run out within hours, and the hospital's morgue capacity proves woefully inadequate for the flood of bodies arriving by truck, cart, and on foot. The psychological casualties prove as overwhelming as the physical ones. Thousands of survivors exhibit symptoms that doctors cannot treat: uncontrollable shaking, inability to speak, and complete catatonic withdrawal from reality. Children orphaned by the firestorm wander the ruins in shock, many unable to remember their own names. The scale of trauma exceeds the capacity of Japan's medical system to provide even basic psychiatric care. The mathematics of destruction. Statistical analysis of the raid's effectiveness astounds even its American architects. Aerial reconnaissance reveals that 267,971 buildings have been completely destroyed across exactly 15.8 square miles of urban Tokyo. The destruction rate of 96.3% within the target area exceeds the effectiveness of every previous strategic bombing operation in human history. The cottage industry system that formed the backbone of Japanese aircraft production has been obliterated. Intelligence estimates suggest that 18% of Japan's total aircraft manufacturing capacity was eliminated in a single night, along with the skilled workers who operated the small workshops scattered throughout residential neighborhoods. The raid accomplished in 3 hours what months of precision bombing against major factories had failed to achieve. Population displacement reaches catastrophic proportions. Over 1 million Tokyo residents are now homeless, creating a refugee crisis that strains Japan's already limited resources. Emergency shelters designed for a few thousand people must accommodate hundreds of thousands, while food distribution systems collapse under demand that exceeds capacity by orders of magnitude. The economic impact reverberates throughout Japan's war economy. The destroyed districts housed not only small-scale manufacturing, but also the transportation networks that connected Tokyo's industrial areas. Railroad yards, truck depots, and warehouses have been reduced to molten metal and ash, disrupting supply chains that extend across the entire home islands. Japanese military response. General Kawabe Masakazu, commander of Japanese air defenses, studies radar plots and damage reports in his underground command bunker, finally comprehending the scope of American tactical innovation. The low-level night attack has rendered obsolete every defensive system Japan has developed over 3 years of air warfare. Radar installations optimized for high-altitude detection failed to provide adequate warning, while anti-aircraft guns designed for precision engagement proved useless against formations approaching at 5,000 feet in darkness. Fighter squadron commanders report devastating losses among pilots attempting interception. Of 78 aircraft launched against the B-29 formations, only 47 returned to base. Most losses resulted not from enemy action, but from spatial disorientation in smoke-filled darkness, fuel exhaustion after extended climbing, and mechanical failures caused by operating aircraft beyond their designed performance envelopes. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese aircrews equals the physical destruction below. Veteran pilot Captain Sakai Saburo, who has engaged American aircraft from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines, writes in his diary that witnessing Tokyo's destruction from his cockpit represents the moment I knew the war was lost. Similar sentiments appear in captured documents throughout the Japanese military hierarchy. Military planners recognize that if Americans can destroy 16 square miles of Tokyo in a single night, they can systematically eliminate every major city in Japan within months. Defense against such attacks appears impossible with existing resources, while the industrial capacity needed to develop effective countermeasures has been significantly degraded by the raid itself. Imperial acknowledgement in the Imperial Palace, protected by massive concrete fortifications, but less than 5 miles from the devastated districts, Emperor Hirohito receives hourly briefings on the destruction engulfing his capital. Palace officials describe the emperor as visibly shaken by reports of civilian casualties that exceed 100,000 people killed in a single night. Private communications between the emperor and his closest advisors, later captured by Allied intelligence, reveal the raid's profound impact on imperial thinking. For the first time, Hirohito privately questions whether continued resistance serves any useful purpose. The demonstration of American capability to inflict such destruction at will suggests that Japan's position has become strategically hopeless. The emperor's private secretary records that His Majesty spent hours on the palace balcony watching the glow from burning Tokyo illuminate the night sky. The sight of his capital city transformed into a funeral pyre marks the beginning of the emperor's psychological journey toward accepting surrender, though that decision will not be made public for another 5 months of continued devastation. March 11 to 15, 1945. The campaign continues. The success of Operation Meetinghouse Transit forms General Curtis LeMay from a frustrated bomber commander into the architect of Japan's systematic destruction. Within 72 hours of Tokyo's burning, B-29 formations lifted off from Marianas airfields bound for Nagoya, Japan's third-largest city and center of aircraft production. The pattern established over Tokyo, low-level night attacks using maximum incendiary loads, becomes the template for urban destruction across the Japanese home islands. Major Harry Krim pilots boxcar through clear skies over Nagoya on March 11th, leading 285 B-29's carrying 1,790 tons of M69 incendiary clusters. The city below, forewarned by Tokyo's fate, has attempted evacuation, but the dispersed nature of Japanese war production makes complete civilian removal impossible. Small aircraft factories, machine shops, and component manufacturers remain embedded within residential districts that house the workers essential to their operation. The Nagoya raid incinerates 2.95 square miles of urban area, destroying 3,866 buildings and rendering 150,000 people homeless. Japanese resistance proves even weaker than over Tokyo. Only 6 B-29’s suffer battle damage, while all defensive fighters attempting interception fail to achieve effective engagement. The combination of darkness, low altitude, and overwhelming numbers creates tactical conditions that Japanese forces simply cannot counter. On March 13th, Osaka burns. The 274 B-29’s attacking Japan's second city encounter virtually no opposition, their crews describing the mission as almost routine. The psychological conditioning required to incinerate civilian populations has occurred with disturbing rapidity among American air crews. Bombardier Sergeant James McKee writes to his family that burning cities becomes just another job after a while. You focus on your instruments and try not to think about what's happening below. The expanding campaign. By March 19th, LeMay's forces have burned 4 of Japan's 6 largest cities to varying degrees of destruction. Intellige estimates suggest that Japan's aircraft production capacity has been reduced by 40% in 10 days of operations. More significantly, the transportation and communication networks linking Japan's industrial regions have suffered severe disruption. Railroad yards, shipping facilities, and telephone exchanges, all considered incidental targets, have been destroyed along with the residential areas surrounding them. The success of urban incendiary attacks precipitates a fundamental shift in American strategic bombing doctrine worldwide. In Europe, General Karl Spaatz receives authorization to conduct similar area bombing missions against German cities, while Allied commanders in Burma begin planning incendiary attacks against Japanese-occupied urban centers throughout Southeast Asia. Japanese attempts at adaptation prove futile. Dispersal of remaining aircraft factories to underground facilities reduces production capacity, while failing to eliminate vulnerability to bombing. Evacuation of urban populations creates massive refugee populations that strain already limited food and transportation resources. Most critically, the skilled workers essential to war production cannot be replaced once killed or displaced by bombing. Prime Minister Suzuki Kantaro, who assumed office after the fall of Hideki Tojo's government, privately acknowledges that Japan's strategic position has become untenable. Intelligence reports suggest that American bombers can maintain their current pace of urban destruction for months, systematically eliminating every major population center in Japan. The mathematical progression points toward complete industrial collapse within 6 months. The human cost escalates. Dr. Nagai Takashi, a physician and atomic researcher at Nagasaki Medical College, travels to Tokyo in late March to assist with casualty treatment and disaster relief. His medical repose, RT, later captured by Allied forces, provides clinical documentation of the firebombing's unprecedented effects on human populations. Nagai's findings reveal that conventional medical triage systems prove inadequate for treating mass burn casualties on the scale produced by incendiary bombing. Traditional burn treatments, designed for individual patients with limited affected areas, cannot address cases where 80% or more of the body surface has been damaged by radiant heat. Most such patients die within hours, regardless of medical intervention. The psychological casualties prove equally devastating and far more numerous than the physical ones. Nagai estimates that for every person killed outright by the bombing, 3 or 4 survivors suffer what he terms fire neurosis, a syndrome characterized by uncontrollable trembling, selective amnesia, and complete inability to function in social situations. Children prove particularly susceptible, with orphanages reporting that 90% of bombing survivors exhibit severe behavioral disorders. Mass cremations become a daily necessity in bombed cities. but fuel shortages make proper disposal of bodies impossible. Authorities resort to bulldozing corpses into mass graves or burning them in open pits using whatever combustible materials can be found. The public health implications of inadequate body disposal compound the immediate effects of bombing, spreading disease through contaminated water supplies, and creating conditions for epidemic outbreaks. Strategic recognition. By April 1945, neutral diplomatic observers report that Japan's capacity for continued resistance has been fundamentally compromised. Swiss diplomatic cables, intercepted by Allied intelligence, describe Japanese government officials as psychologically defeated, despite their continued public statements about fighting to the death. The strategic bombing campaign has achieved effects that previous military operations could not accomplish. Japanese civilian morale, long considered unbreakable by Western observers, shows clear signs of collapse. Opinion surveys conducted secretly by Japanese academic institutions reveal that 60% of urban residents believe the war should end immediately, even if surrender terms prove harsh. Industrial production statistics confirm the bombing campaign's effectiveness. Aircraft output in April 1945 reaches only 40% of January levels, while skilled worker availability has declined by similar margins due to casualties and evacuation. The dispersed cottage industry system that once provided flexibility and resilience has become a liability, creating numerous vulnerable targets that cannot be adequately defended. Japanese military leaders privately acknowledge that continued resistance serves no strategic purpose other than demonstrating national resolve. Field Marshal Hata Shunichi writes in his diary that Japan's situation has become objectively hopeless, but notes that honor requires fighting until the emperor formally authorizes surrender. The path to August. The strategic bombing campaign continues through spring and early summer 1945, systematically destroying every major Japanese city except Kyoto, removed from target lists by Secretary of War Henry Stimson, and several cities reserved for atomic bomb testing. By August 1945, over 60 Japanese urban areas have experienced significant incendiary attacks, with a cumulative death toll approaching 500,000 civilians. The psychological impact on Japanese leadership proves more significant than the physical destruction. The demonstration that American air power can destroy Japanese cities at will, combined with evidence of American willingness to target civilian populations directly, creates conditions where surrender becomes psychologically acceptable to leaders who had previously considered such action impossible. Emperor Hirohito's August 15th surrender broadcast will reference the new and most cruel bomb used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but private imperial communications reveal that the systematic firebombing campaign had already convinced palace officials that continued resistance was futile. The atomic weapons provided a face-saving justification for a decision that strategic bombing had already made inevitable. The B-29 superfortress, initially designed for precision daylight bombing, has become the instrument that transforms strategic air power from a supporting element of warfare into a decisive weapon capable of compelling national surrender. The aircraft that Japanese pilots once mocked for its size has burned Japan's capacity for resistance to ash and cinders, one city at a time. August 15, 1945. Imperial Palace, Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito stands before a single microphone, preparing to deliver the most difficult speech of his reign. Outside the palace walls, the ruins of his capital city stretch for miles in every direction. 16 square miles of ash and rubble that once housed nearly 1 million of his subjects. The new and most cruel bomb he will reference in his surrender broadcast represents only the final punctuation mark on a campaign of destruction that began 5 months earlier with the raid that changed everything. The transformation proves complete and irreversible. Japanese pilots who once dismissed the B-29 as an oversized target now understand they witnessed the emergence of a new form of warfare, where technological superiority renders traditional courage meaningless. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's greatest aces, will write years later that watching Tokyo burn from his cockpit marked the moment when individual heroism became obsolete against industrial might. The strategic implications extend far beyond Japan's surrender. The B-29 campaign demonstrates that modern warfare has evolved beyond contests between military forces to encompass entire civilizations. Cities, previously considered sanctuaries protected by distance and fortification, have become primary targets vulnerable to destruction from ranges that render defensive measures ineffective. The very concept of civilian immunity from warfare, enshrined in international law for centuries, has been incinerated along with Japan's wooden cities. Curtis LeMay's innovation in strategic bombing doctrine, the shift from precision attacks on military targets to area destruction of urban centers, will influence military thinking for generations. The general's cold calculation that burning Japanese cities would save American lives in an invasion establishes a precedent for targeting civilian populations when military necessity demands it. Future conflicts will repeatedly invoke this logic, from Korea to Vietnam to the nuclear standoff that will define the Cold War. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurs in humanity's relationship with its own destructive capabilities. The sight of B-29 formations reducing entire cities to ash in single nights reveals the terrifying efficiency with which industrial civilization can destroy itself. The aircraft that Japanese pilots initially mocked has become the harbinger of an age where human survival depends not on individual courage or national resolve, but on the collective wisdom to constrain technologies too powerful for any nation to wield responsibly. The mockery has ended. In its place stands the recognition that when technological superiority meets strategic ruthlessness, the result is not victory in any traditional sense, but the transformation of warfare itself into something that threatens the very foundations of civilized existence. The B-29 superfortress leveled more than Tokyo in that single night. It leveled the assumptions upon which human conflict had been conducted for millennia, replacing them with the stark realization that future wars might well consume victor and vanquished alike.